What's up, guys, and welcome back to another video from the Young Guns podcast, another playoff series, and obviously this one is a big one. This one is the Battle of Ontario, the Ottawa Senators, obviously my childhood team, versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. Going to be slugging it out in round one this year. This is actually the first time the teams will be meeting since the 03-04 series. So it's been a while, but now they're back, and we should expect a really great series between obviously the Sens and the Leafs. You know, the Sens, a team that haven't made the playoffs since 2017 and making it once again this season, you know, scoring 97 points, you know, been consistent all year, got all the wins that they needed, and, you know, almost overcame the gap actually with the Florida Panthers towards the end of it. But, you know, Toronto did their thing as well this year, topped the Atlantic Division, won 108 points. New coach, you know, some new pieces, some different secondary scoring some different additions to their decor. Obviously, this is a different team in terms of principle with Craig Berube, excuse me, and obviously the Sens are their first season under coach Travis Green. But, you know, Luca, what are your first thoughts on this series before I really start getting at it?
I mean, it's the Battle of Ontario, and I think it's going to always fun, those games. Ottawa and Toronto, you know, they're two teams that really don't like each other. It's a big rivalry there between those two teams, and you know, Ottawa's got a lot to prove. I think this year, I think they're gonna want to come into this series, and kind of give Toronto a hard time and try to see what they can, achieve in this series against a team like the Leafs, who have had a really good season this year and played some really good hockey. I think the other thing too about Ottawa is, it's one of those things that they finally took that step up. You know, they were on a rebuild for a while. Obviously they brought in Steos, they brought in Travis Green, like you said. They made some acquisitions during the offseason and obviously at the trade deadline as well. They've come in and they've kind of looked, they've looked really good all year this year. They've been consistent for the most part. They've had a couple of stretches of, a couple of losing streaks, 5 games here and there, but for the most part, they've had a really consistent season. And I think for the first time, Ottawa fans are going to be able to see this team in action in the playoffs against a really good opponent in the Toronto Maple Leafs. And they're going to be able to see Brady Tkachuk in the playoffs, which I think is what a lot of Sens fans are really excited about. It's a young team. It's an exciting team. I think there's a lot of promise with this team, and I think they're going to be able to do some damage to Toronto. So, Zach, I'm going to let you kind of give your analysis a little bit first, and then I'll kind of jump in and see how I view this series. But I'll let you start first, since it's your beloved Sens.
Well, I think, Brady Tkachuk played during the last game of the season yesterday. Getting his feet warmed up, but you know that this guy has been grueling for this moment to finally play playoff hockey. You know, he's been going to support his brother in Calgary and in Florida, watching some of the games, and he's witnessed his brother win the Stanley Cup last year, and he wants to do absolutely the same thing. And I think what we saw out of Brady Tkachuk at the Four Nations is a preview of the playoff Brady Tkachuk. This guy was completely dominant, really excelled in a more physical brand of hockey. And it just embodies what Brady Tkachuk is in his essence. Like, the guy is just, he's a fighter, hard on his sleeve, greasy guy, will get you that big goal. He's everything embodied into what, playoff hockey is all about. And I think we're going to see the best of him back for, in game one as soon as game one of this series. And, he's going to be accompanied by a Sens team that, I've obviously watched throughout the entirety of the year, but, a Sens team that, I was confident in this team before the trade deadline, but I'm even more confident in this team now after the addition of a guy like Nick Cousins, who really solidified the 2C role for that team.
You mean
Dylan? You look at this team from top to bottom, and they added Zetterlund as well at the deadline, and there's depth all around, and there's a team that could. I think the approach that come playoff time is going to be scoring through 4 lines and not 3. And so they demoted Zetterlund, quote unquote, demoted him to the fourth line. He'll be playing with Adam Gaudette and Nick Cousins, who's back, and another greasy guy who's scored a big goal for Florida against Toronto in that series 2 years ago. So you look at it here, the fourth line, Cousins, Gaudette, Zetterlund. And if we move our way up, Ridley Gregg has really been coming into his own this year as a regular NHLer and has really found some confidence in his game. Shane Pinto, another 20-plus goal season out of him. Michael Amadio has been crucial for them down the stretch. And, Cousins, Batherson are two guys that have been playing with each other since the juniors and rekindled their chemistry, since they acquired Cousins at the deadline. David Perron, greasy guy as well. Brady Tkachuk, Stützle and Giroux on that top line has been, they've been accustomed to that, but they're bringing that line back together for the playoffs. And, I trust their decor as well this year because, Sanderson has been amazing, not only being the quarterback on PP1, but he's just, a guy that you could play 30 minutes a night, effortless skater, always seems to be in position. He's a guy who's really, he could play as a shutdown defenseman, but he's also able to get up the ice and contribute to the rush as well. And Thomas Chabot is probably, you could probably agree to this, probably had his best year in the past, let's say 4 seasons, in terms of his health, but also his consistent play and his play specifically in his own end. Jensen's been a really nice addition to the team. Zub is healthy for the playoffs. He's a nice shutdown piece as well. And then you got a guy in Ullmark and Ned who made the difference for them. I don't think they make the playoffs this year without Linus Ullmark. He was inconsistent at times, but on most nights you're getting above average goaltending from Linus Ullmark, and this is the missing piece for this group. And obviously you get a coach in Travis Green who's shown them some more attention to detail, and you have a group that's going in. A group that plays with a lot of composure, is much better in their own end, but is also able to score 5-on-5, and they're good enough on special teams as well. But now let's go more to the Toronto side of things. I don't think just because I look at the stats and you say okay, in the past 20 games. If you look at the stats, the Sens won, let's say 75% of those games against Toronto. I know it plays a big factor, but it's going to be different because, you're playing Toronto now in the playoffs. And this is a Toronto team that, despite the Sens also sweeping them in the regular season, this is a Toronto team, right?
Yeah.
Think of added components that will be more crucial to them come playoff time. They added some more sandpaper across their lineup. And what I mean by that, I don't mean by, Toronto years past where they just added goons to their team. I think they just have, some more, they have more grit in certain areas. A guy like, Chris Tanev, who they added is, a guy like that is awesome. Is always going to put his body in the line come playoff time. Philip Myers is a big body as well. They added Brandon Carlo, who's a nice stabilizing force to any decor. Their decor is pretty good. Despite Morgan Riley not having the best year this year, they're gonna have. I know what's projected on the screen, but they're gonna have Ekman Larson probably back for the start of the series, and Ekman Larson's gonna be back. Jake McCabe is gonna be back. It's a pretty steady decor that could, I think would be, good enough to trust all 6 in a long playoff format. And if you look at their forwards, Bobby McMahon has had a nice season for them. They obviously added Scott Lockton, who's, the kind of guy that they brought in to help them in the playoffs. But if you look at their top 12, it looks like a well-balanced group. And it's not just a group that is going to be reliant on their top superstars on the first 2 lines. So this is a good Toronto team. They have a coach that won the Stanley Cup with Craig Berube with the Blues in 2019. He has that kind of pedigree, and they've been playing a brand of hockey that has not just been loosey-goosey during the regular season and letting the Stars just take them out of a mess, or the Stars basically carry them through to victory. It is a team that could win different ways now. They're a team that could win a close game that is just maybe a 2-1 game. They're able to pull through. And, a big difference for them this year is that, it won't be Joseph Woll who's going to be starting between the pipes, but it's going to be Anthony Stolarz, who's been fantastic for them all year. I know he got hurt, but even when he came back, he maintained, I believe, a 925 save percentage.
Yeah.
And he's obviously, I
He's
think
at
it's 25. I could be wrong.
926, yeah.
26. And he's obviously a big body in the net. I think he's about 6'5". And, that always helps when the game gets more condensed during the playoffs. But, I think it's going to be a really entertaining series, extremely physical, but I absolutely think that the Sens are gonna knock these guys off.
In how many games?
I think it's gonna be. I'm calling it Sens in 6.
Whoa!
I don't think it's gonna go into 7. I think the
Cool.
Sens team has been itching to get to the playoffs for so long,
Right.
and it's like now, like you're releasing this beast out of a cage, and you got guys like Brady, Tkachuk, and all of this core that have been grueling for this moment for the past 5 to 7 years. And they're a well-rounded group, and I think they're fresh, they're ready for playoff hockey, and I think they have more ingredients in terms of grit and being able to rise up to the occasion that Toronto have. Because let's be honest, guys, Auston Matthews is a choker in the playoffs. Auston Matthews is a choker. Mitch Marner is a choker. But you have a guy in Brady Tkachuk, and you have Jimmy Stu and Claude Giroux, who's been a long tenured player in the playoffs, and the rest of the core for the Sens, who I think I would trust more in a playoff series than I would trust Toronto's guys, if I'm being honest. And I think the core for the Sens is going to help them pull through in this series. What do you think?
Interesting. I'm gonna tend to agree with you, and the reason I'm gonna just jump into like what I think about this series. Obviously, I'll start with the Leafs first. I mean, regular season, we all know how successful the Leafs have always been in the regular season, right? Mitch Marner, career year this year. Career season in the sense that he had 75 assists, 102 points in 81 games. Contract year for him. William Nylander as well, 45 goals, 84 points. He was fantastic. Auston Matthews, 78 points in 67 games, which is still really good. Obviously, I think Leaf fans expected a little bit more goals out of him. He had a little bit more assistant goals this year, but still a really good season nonetheless. John Tavares, basically a point-a-game player, 74 points in 75 games. And Matt Nyes had a really steady season this year, 29 goals, 29 assists, 78 games played, 58 points for him. Toronto's always had this success in the regular season. I think we've always seen, the superstar talent that they have, the top six being, one of the best top sixes in the league, always finding ways to improve their roster in the regular season. The question has always been for Toronto is the playoffs, right? Is, not being able to get it done in the playoffs, not being able to obviously get past round one, or in their case, last year, round two, against Florida, and just not being able to get over that hump. And I look at their roster this year, and I think they made some really good moves. Scott Laughton is a guy who I think can really be a really good 3C for them, even a 4C if anything, if needed. He's a big body, plays big. Doesn't really provide that much scoring. I think with Toronto, he only had 4 points in 20 games, but he's a guy who I think can bring a lot of added depth and just be smart in his own end, which I think Toronto's going to need. And even on the back end, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Jake McCabe are two guys that have been injured. They're probably both going to play to start game one, right? They brought in Brandon Carlo as well, which I think was a big addition for them on that back end, smart defensively. And then in net, I think there's a big difference compared to last year, which is the fact that, Wall started last year, didn't really look great. Kind of struggled, and then Anthony Stolarz, this season has been out of this world. He's been probably one of the best goaltenders in the league, when healthy. So I think Toronto does have a lot more going for them this season. I don't necessarily think this is a team that, at least if you look at it on paper, is scary, or not. Not that they're not scary. I don't think this is a team on paper that is gonna, have the same, let's say, thought processes last year. I think they're a lot better than they were last year. I think they're better built than they were last year. My biggest concern, and I've always said this for Toronto, and I'm going to keep on saying it because it just seems to be the reality, is can this team do it in the playoffs, right? And I look at Ottawa,
Right.
and I'm going to be honest, I look at the Senators, I look at how well they've played this season, I look at the consistency that they've had, I look at the fact that they've been very well coached by Travis Green, and the fact that they finally have a starting goaltender in Linus Ullmark. And I just think that Ottawa's going to be a little bit more motivated this year compared to Toronto. I think Toronto has a lot to prove just as much as Ottawa, but Ottawa is one of those teams that, like Zach mentioned before, right, hasn't made the playoffs since 2017. They're coming in, excited, hungry, anxious. They're ready to go, right? And they play a big game. We talk about the Ottawa Senators, right? And you talked about physicality in the Tampa and Florida series. And in this series, there's going to be a lot of physicality. Ottawa's a team that does not back down, right? Brady Tkachuk, like you said, he's going to be a menace in the playoffs, right? Tim Stützle, one of the most skilled guys in the league, right? But even on that second, third line, Pinto's a guy that likes to get in the corners and be aggressive. Ridley Gregg, right, arguably Leaf fans can argue that they probably hate him the most out of anybody just because of the incident that happened last.
Yeah.
Right. So I think Ridley Gregg is going to be a really big problem for the Leafs this year, right? And even on the back end, Zub's a physical player. Martin, Paulo, Clevin, Shabbat, Sanderson, these are all guys that I think can throw hits and play big as well. And in net, I think Linus Ullmark is a guy that, has had familiarity against the Leafs this season too, not only playing against them and sweeping them in the series, but also in the past with the Bruins, right? He played them too, and he was really good. So I think this is going to be a lot closer than a lot of people are going to imagine it. I don't necessarily think anyone thinks Toronto's winning this series in 5, unless maybe you ask Leaf fans. But in my personal opinion, and again, this is not, I'm trying to put all my biases aside because realistically, I'm a Habs fan.
We both hate Toronto, right?
Right.
Let's get this off our chest. We both
hate Toronto. I mean, we both hate Toronto, but you also have to understand that I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. Ottawa's success too is not, if you're a Canadiens fan, you don't want Ottawa to succeed either. It depends on who you ask. I actually don't mind the Sens, but either way, I think this is going to be a really fun series. I think Ottawa's just got a little bit more juice. And the reason I say that is Toronto this year has a lot more pressure on Ottawa because Ottawa's going into this playoff series with no expectations, no pressure really, right? They're just happy to be in the playoffs. They're happy to be, finally taking that next step. And they're going to be motivated. I think the fans are excited, right? Canadian Tire Center, is already selling out their tickets. Like it's something big in Ottawa right now. And I think for them, they're really excited to be in this position and to be able to play these games. And I think for Ottawa, that's why it's going to be really nice for them to be able to do this. For Toronto, there's a lot of pressure. And the reason there's a lot of pressure is because Mitch Marner is a UFA at the end of the season, right? And they have to make a decision as to if they're going to re-sign him or not. And I think a lot of that is dependent on how far they go in the playoffs. Matthew Knies needs a contract at the end of the season, right? He's another guy that they need to talk about to see what they're going to sign at the end of the season. John Tavares, same thing. So the Leafs have a lot of question marks to answer in free agency after the season's over. And I think that with the acquisition of obviously Craig Berube and with the acquisition of Scott Laughton and Stolars and Carlo that they brought in this season, they now have no excuse, right? This is not a conversation now of, oh, it's a coaching problem. Oh, it's a GM problem. Oh, they don't have the right players. This is now a situation of Auston Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, and William Nylander need to get it done. And if they don't get it done, then I at this point, I think they're just cursed or it just doesn't work. I think your recipe has been long enough now that it just clearly isn't working and you're going to have to try something different. So I think for Toronto, there's a lot of pressure and I think they're going to feel that pressure. And I think the fact is that, we talked about it at the beginning. And I think a lot of people, even on social media, were like, oh, the Leafs are trying to avoid playing Florida or they're trying to avoid playing Tampa. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think Toronto would have probably been in a much better position to play Florida or Tampa because they're familiar with either of their games. Toronto's not familiar with Ottawa's game, right? They don't really know how Ottawa's going to come
in the playoffs.
Right.
Because
but that's what I'm saying.
And nobody knows really because
right.
We've seen them play meaningful hockey down the stretch, yes, to clinch out that playoff spot. But nobody actually knows what and myself included, because obviously I'm just a fan. We don't know what this team's going to look like in the playoffs. We don't know how physical they're going to be. We don't know how they're going to deal with adversity. We don't know what Linus Ullmark is going to look like under pressure come playoff time. We kind of know what he looks like as a playoff goalie if you go based off of his stint in Boston. But this is a different team in front of him as well.
Yeah.
And there's that to consider. But I think, like, back to your point about Toronto not being able to get it done in the playoffs, it's been 8 years they've been trying to make this work with this core. I know the core was young at first and, inexperience played a factor. And, these were guys that were just getting accustomed to taking it to the next level at the NHL, the NHL. But now, like in the past couple of years, there's no excuse anymore. And I think now they're just buying time. Like this core is, I'm not going to say it's one guy who's absolutely the problem, because I think all of their core, they're all fantastic hockey players,
Right.
worthy of, like at some point Hall of Fame consideration, just how based on the talent alone. But
Right.
I just think it doesn't work as a mesh. Like a guy like Nylander could go somewhere else and be the guy, but he's in Toronto and he's their third forward. Does that sit well with him? I think he's content in Toronto. And same thing with Mitch Marner. Like the guy he's a guy who's constantly criticized, but he's a guy who keeps getting like this year 100 points for them, but
Right.
keeps getting criticized. I think not only for them as an organization, but just for their players. I think their players won't say it, but I think some of their core is absolutely worn out with the city and the expectations. And I think they owe it. And I think they owe it for once to actually reassess. Like if they don't beat the Sens in this series, and like you're saying, they added all the pieces around to make it work. Like, what more do you need? You got a good goaltender who's been consistent for you all year. You added, some pieces to your decor to add some physicality and some shutdown ability to the back end. And your forwards, you got a well-rounded group this year. Like, what is really the excuse? It's really going to fall down to the Stars. And if it doesn't work out for them, like, they'd be foolish to not reassess their situation come this offseason. But nonetheless, it's a lot of pressure on the group to get it done this year. But I would disagree with you from the Sens perspective that, their expectation is just to go in and have fun. Like, no, this is a team that was victim of a rebuild, and they want to see how good this core actually is.
Yeah.
And let's say you lose to Toronto in 4 or 5 games, then it's like, well, wait a minute. I know we made the playoffs, but we got to reassess some things on our end as well. They didn't build this team to be one and done once they were, for playing in their first playoff series. They built this team to win. You draft a guy like Brady Tkachuk and you make him your captain because you think this guy is going to lead you to win.
Yeah.
And, all the pieces that they added. And it's not like they didn't pay these guys as well. Like, yeah, I know, like for example, Jake Sanderson, I know, they paid him early in this and this and that, but the guy's playing fantastic now, and Tim Stützle as well. Like, they paid these guys $8 million a year, Brady Tkachuk as well. The expectation is that once they play in the playoffs, they're going to be difference makers. So I think there's going to be just as much pressure on Ottawa's core as there is on Toronto this year. And for Ottawa, I think, they absolutely have to get it done in this series. You're playing against a team in Toronto that, is, mentally they could crack. And you've seen it in the past number of years. Against Florida, they cracked. All those times they lost against the Bruins, they cracked. And even last year was the most recent example. You have to show that you can win a playoff series. So I think the expectation internally for the Sens is not just to go into the playoffs and get that experience. It's you got to win a series. You got to win a playoff series.
Yeah, I mean, I think, let me reiterate on that point. I'm not saying that Ottawa's coming in to just, have fun and do that. I think they do have expectations, at least internally, from the organization, like you mentioned. I think if you were to ask, I think the way I'm wording it in the sense of the Senators is, this is a team that is finally going to be able to taste playoff action. And I think that, you look at their core and they're probably not still a finished product. I think they're still missing a couple of pieces to become that true contender that they need to become. But at the same time, this experience that they're going to go through, right, is going to make them better in the long run. I think, like you mentioned, right, the being able to understand what your roster looks like and how, who can be core guys, who are guys that maybe aren't going to necessarily be part of the core. I mean, they traded Josh Norris, right, and they brought in Dylan Cousins, and I think they believe Dylan Cousins is going to be their 2C, right, with Pinto as their 3. Like, that's a really good center mix over there of 3 centers that they have. They brought in Zetterlund, but he's kind of been, up and down the lineup. They haven't really found a spot for him that works.
Yeah, but he has. I have to note that in the past 5 games, he's gotten 3 points.
Yeah.
He finally got, after I think 17 or 16 games, he finally got his first as a Sen, and then he scored another. But he's been a guy, I think, that came into a situation that in San Jose he was relied on to be one of their top forwards. He comes to a team like Ottawa that is already pretty established in their top guys and gets less ice time adjusting to a new team. But down the stretch, this guy has been starting to produce.
Yeah, no,
And I don't think it's wrong by Travis Green putting him on the fourth line, because you're basically saying, yeah, we want scoring on all four lines.
Yeah,
And
I think the way I'm seeing it is, it's like Ottawa's got this team that I think, they've come in, like I said, they've got a young group, but not only that, I think their defense, right? Like, I mean, obviously Hamonic isn't in the lineup. He's played a lot this year. I don't think he's expected to play this game one at least.
I would
But
hope not.
Ottawa's got still a lot of like question marks on to like how good their team can be and what improvements they need to make next year. But I think if they get past Toronto, I think you've answered a lot of your questions already. That okay, there is
Yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
possibilities that this team can go far, and that there's core guys on this team, right? But like you mentioned, if Ottawa loses in 4 or 5, there might be a situation where you turn around and you go, okay, you know what, maybe there is some changes that we need to make. Maybe there is some question marks that we need to ask about this team as to how good they can possibly be. And I think there's a lot of question marks with Ottawa, but I think in the sense for the fans, they're excited to be in this series, and they're excited that they're playing an opponent like Toronto, because it's going to see exactly and be able to differentiate where the Sens are at versus where the Leafs are at, and be able to kind of make you understand, like, okay, that's where we want to be, right? But just going back to Ottawa a second, like Linus Ullmark, I think, is going to be a really big difference maker in this series, along with Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle and Jake Sanderson. I think Ottawa's best players are going to have to be their best players, and I think that's the expectation. I also think that that's going to need to be the reality, right? If Ottawa's best players get shut down by Toronto, I think it's going to be a really quick series, and I think Toronto's going to pounce on them. But if Ottawa's best players can be their best players, and if Ottawa's depth guys like Pinto and Greg can keep producing at the level that they have been all year, I don't see how Ottawa can't win this series in 7 games. I really don't. I think Ullmark, like you mentioned, was the missing piece that they needed. They brought him in. He's been great for them. Forsberg's had his ups and downs this year. I think he's been better lately compared to early on in the year. But Ottawa's got a really interesting situation, because Linus Ullmark goes down, right? You also have Levi Marilainen in the minors, who's come in and looked really good for Ottawa in the games that he's played this year. So Ottawa's got a lot of confidence, I think, in their goaltending. I think they've got a lot of confidence and beliefs in this group. And I think Travis Green has had them playing really good, meaningful playoff hockey for about, I would say, 15, 20 games now. And so I think Ottawa's ready to go for this moment. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Ottawa Senators are going to beat the Leafs in 7 games. But it can go either way. But I think the Battle of Ontario is going to be juicy, and I think Ottawa's going to be ready for this opportunity, and they're going to find a way to win. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely going to be juicy, and it's going to be physical, because you got two teams that have a ton of expectations on them now, and I think there's a lot on the line. Like we said, did the rebuild work for the Sens?
Right.
And for Toronto, is this core it for us, or do we have to move on? So two teams with a lot of things to prove, and every time they play in the regular season, there's this sentiment that these teams really don't like each other.
Right.
There's always something that goes on. Whether it's really Greg taking a slap shot into an empty net and then getting cross-checked in the face by Morgan Riley, or is it just all out physicality? Two teams that are constantly getting under each other's skin. We're gonna see a nasty series between these two teams. But it's gonna make for some entertaining hockey, and I'm gonna leave it at that. For me, it's go Sens go. I'm happy they're back in the playoffs. Playoff tickets are kind of skyrocketing right now
Right.
at the CTC. That's for sure. So the excitement is in the air. But I have a lot of faith in the group based on what I've seen this year in terms of the growth. Not only just being able to just score goals and plug in numbers. This is a team that has learned to deal with adversity, and not just like Sens teams of old, just crumbling in the third period, coughing up a lead. This is a team that has been able to control games, and they've showed that they've matured and come a long way.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. So I think it's gonna be a fun series. I'm excited to see what happens. Ottawa. It's exciting to see Ottawa back in the playoffs, even as a Canadiens fan, and at least Toronto's going to be playing another Canadian team. So at least one way or another, there's going to be a Canadian team moving on. I think in an ideal world, you probably don't want that to happen, but in terms of like two Canadian teams playing each other, but I think the Sens will find a way to beat the Ottawa Senators. The Sens will find a way to beat the Leafs, and I think it'll be a great series. So
Yeah.
Sens in 7, in my opinion.
Sens in 7. You heard it here from a Habs fan.
Yes, sir.
So this has
All
been
right.
another playoff matchup video. We still have a couple more to cover, but this has been our analysis for the Battle of Ontario. So guys, just stay tuned for more of our content. This has been Zach
And Luca.
and guys, thanks for watching.
Peace.